Welcome. This year is the 700th anniversary of the death of Dante Alighieri. He is a world-renowned Italian poet who was born in the late medieval era in Florence. He wrote the Divine Comedy, comprising 3 books: Inferno, Purgatory, and Paradise. It is a privilege today to have Dr. Sonia Fanucchi with us. She is from the University of the Witwatersrand, and she has founded a South African society on Dante called Dantessa. She is also the editor of a forthcoming book, which is called A South African Convivio with Dante, Born Free's Interpretations of the Commedia. Welcome.
Thank you.
Dr. Fanucchi, could you talk to us a bit about Dante Alighieri, and also in particular what inspired his wonderful poem?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here, and it's always a privilege to talk about Dante, this medieval Italian poet that seems so remote from our context and yet talks directly to us. What's interesting about Dante, most people will know him as the man that went to hell. In fact, he didn't just go to hell. He went to Purgatory, he went to Paradise, and the poem is about a lot more than just that. So it has the gruesome hell scenes, but it has so much more in it as well. It's a philosophical treatise, it's a religious treatise, it's spiritual, it's extremely personal. And in that way, it reaches us on so many levels. As to who Dante was, you cannot talk about his poem, his great Commedia, in 3 parts, without also talking about him. His life is wedded to his work, and his work unfolds the story of his life in this great context of the afterlife. So who he was, the seed for the Commedia was first sown in Florence when Dante was a young man, in his spiritual love and affection for Beatrice, this woman who is more than just a Hollywood romance. She's not a romantic love at all, yet she is this personal, close friend, that he experiences these close moments with her, just in fleeting moments. She's a young Florentine girl who he met when she was 9 years old, and who he then saw again when she was 18, and she greeted him in the street, inspiring him with this great affection for her. And he wrote this little book of poems dedicated to her called the Vita Nuova. And then at the end of this, Beatrice died. She died young, age 24. And Dante, at the very end of this book, he says, I can't talk about her now. I have to turn away from her. I can't do this now. I will return to Beatrice. And that is what the Divine Comedy is. It marks a return to Beatrice. This happens after Dante's exile. After he falls from grace in Florence, he becomes this wandering beggar. And then he, at that moment, at that nadir of despair, once he was cast out of Florence, he remembers Beatrice. And the call of Beatrice is what draws him back to this story, this journey through the afterlife, ultimately to heaven and to her. And she becomes the symbol of his spiritual homecoming.
Well, you've given us a marvelous sweep of Dante, his inspiration for this actual poem, and also intriguingly of how his actual life is woven in to his work, to his art. So that's really very interesting. Is there much response to Dante in South Africa?
So what's really exciting for us, he's always had a presence in elite circles. So writers like Guy Butler, later Jane Coetzee, and of course the late Chris Mann, all of them were inspired by Dante. Dante was their muse in many respects, and he appears in their works. However, there wasn't much of a presence for Dante until recently. So what I've noticed in my teaching, and my colleague as well, Dr. Anita Virga at Wits, two of us have noticed in our teaching that there is a growing interest in this poet among our young people. And that is the subject of our forthcoming book, for which our young people have written works, little poems, short stories, autobiographical narratives, all of them inspired by Dante. And what we noticed is that Dante translates very powerfully into our own context. You wouldn't think so. He's this ancient medieval poet, and yet he reaches out across time and space and becomes relevant for us. And this is the exciting thing. We're engaged in a very exciting research endeavor with our students, trying to see how far we can take this. Can we create a space for Dante in South Africa? And my feeling is we certainly can.
Well, I must say, I'm very much looking forward to the book. So I hope it's going to be freely available in South Africa. It's something that is certainly going to be a landmark, I think. I don't think it's happened before in terms of Africa even. Am I right?
I mean, there have been obviously scholarly writings about Dante in Africa, but nothing of this kind, which marries the creative to the scholarly. So part of the book deals with the creative responses of the students, and then scholars speaking about how this could affect us in South Africa. And that seems to be where our Dante research in South Africa is going at this point.
Thank you. Well, we look forward to that very much indeed. Today's reading is from the prologue to Dante's Inferno. It will be read in the original Italian first, and then it will be read in translation. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura che la diritta via era smarrita. Ai, quanto a dir qual era è cosa dura, esta selva selvaggia e aspra e forte, che nel pensier rinnova la paura. Tant'è amara che poco è più morte, ma per trattar del ben ch'io vi trovai, dirò de altre cose, chi vo scorte. Io non so ben ridir, com'i vi entrai, tant'era pien di sonno e a quel punto, che la verace via abbandonai. Ma poi ch'io fui al piedi un colle giunto, là dove terminava quella valle, che m'aveva di paura il cor compunto, guardai in alto e vidi sulle spalle, vestiti già dei raggi del pianeta, che meno dritto altrui per ogni calle. Allor fu la paura un poco queta, che nel lago del cor mi era durata la notte, che passai con tanta pietà. E come quei
che con lena affannata, uscito fuor dal pelago alla riva, si volge all'acqua perigliosa e guata. Così l'animo mio, che ancor fuggiva, si volse a retro a rimarar lo passo, che non lasciò giammai persona viva. A reading from the Prologue to Dante's Inferno. Midway in the journey of our life, I came to myself in a dark wood, for the straight way was lost. Ah, how hard it is to tell the nature of that wood, savage, dense and harsh. The very thought of it renews my fear. It is so bitter. Death is hardly more so. But to set forth the good I found, I will recount the other things I saw. How I came there I cannot really tell. I was so full of sleep when I forsook the one true way. But when I reached the foot of a hill, there where the valley ended, that had pierced my heart with fear, looking up, I saw its shoulders arrayed in the first light of the planet that leads men straight, no matter what their road. Then the fear that had endured in the lake of my heart all the night I spent in such distress was calmed. And as one who, with labouring breath, has escaped from the deep to the shore, turns and looks back at the perilous waters, so my mind, still in flight, turned back to look once more upon the past. No mortal being ever left alive.
In the opening of this poem, Dante speaks about being lost in the selva oscura. It's almost as if he's lost in the dark. It's as if he can't find his way, and he says he doesn't know how he got there. Now, to me, that seems like an extraordinarily evocative image. And would you say, we've spoken about Dantessa, we've spoken about Dante in South Africa, would you say that it actually has significance worldwide?
Definitely. So the Selva Oscura, it has its links to Augustine, which is one of Dante's many muses, who wrote the Confessions, which is a very personal story about homecoming to God, similar to Dante's story. So Augustine talks about a silva, a forest becoming lost in sin, and Dante uses that image, the Selva Oscura, this dark wood. It is allegorical in the sense that it symbolically represents the state of being lost in sin, of having wandered far away from the right path. And it has many possible implications. So what's beautiful is, although it has a very theological origin, it reaches out to a modern world in ways that Dante himself couldn't have understood, but that are very real to us. So people that have been through a depression would understand that image, would immediately relate to that sense of finding oneself lost, not being able to understand how one got there, or even what sort of a state one is in. Because this is the Augustinian phrase is a regio dissimilitudines, which means a land of unlikeness, where signs don't match their meanings. So we are in such a state of despair that we can no longer interpret the world around us. We can no longer interpret our own spiritual condition. And that's exactly the state that Dante's in. It's very much a state that we can all understand. And the first words of this poem indicate that. He says, midway in the journey of our life, nostra vita, it is all of us that he includes. So although we get the sense that this is a very personal experience, it's a personal memory, he's very clear, it's midway, it was halfway through my life when this happened. It's a personal thing, and it inspires a very emotional reaction. How hard it is to tell. Although it seems to be very personal to him, it's also something that we can read our experience into. It can be personal and political. For us in South Africa, we can see it politically. We've been through a very dark past. We've been in a state, a regio dissimilitudines of our own, and that has affected people personally as well.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us all, and we look forward to further visits.
Thank you for having me.
There will be another 2 sessions with Dr. Fanucchi in the forthcoming weeks, so be sure not to miss that. We look forward to that very much indeed. Please remember to click subscribe, click the bell below, and visit me at my website, formuse.org.